Cool! Welcome to the quick start guide to Photoshop part 2. Hey guys, and welcome to Flurn. My name is Aaron Nace, and you can find me on flurn.com, where we make learning Photoshop and photography fun. And today we're going through our quick start guide to Photoshop part 2. Basically, it's continuing from part 1, where we went through and showed you guys how to use like the preferences and actually getting your settings right, how to change keyboard shortcuts, working with your tools and the menus that go along with your tools, and an introduction to layers. So the idea here with this guide is basically like anyone who's like really early on into Photoshop, just to kind of get you a little bit more settled so you feel like you've got the fundamentals down and you're ready to start doing things in Photoshop. So for you advanced users out there, this might be a little bit too simple for you, but for those of you guys that are just starting out, this should be perfect. So here in part 2, we're gonna go over some of the more commonly used tools. We're gonna go over layers, layer masking, some adjustment layers, and some options that are gonna help you guys get together. So these are not gonna be like, you'll probably wind up needing more tools in the future, but if you master all these tools that we're about to get over, that's gonna be a big chunk of Photoshop. So the first tool we're going to go over is the Move tool, and that's located right up here in the top left, and it's an incredibly powerful tool because you can move things around. Now if I'm on a background layer, it's going to say I can't do anything, so we're going to hit OK, and I'm going to hit Command J, which is going to make a duplicate of that layer. So the background layer stays locked just to like make sure, generally you're not supposed to put much on the background layer, just leave it as it is. Now here in layer 1, let's just zoom out. I'm going to move this layer 1 around, and you can see with the Move tool, like literally that's all it does. You click and drag around. Now if it was just that, the Move tool wouldn't be that powerful, but the Move tool comes in combination with the Transform tool. So if you want to actually transform something, hit Control or Command T and you can start transforming. You can also have it say Show Transform Controls with the Move tool, and then you can just click any of these corners and start moving them around. So you don't have to hit Command T. As long as you have that checked, you can actually just start transforming. I prefer not to check it. It's a little bit cleaner. And then Control or Command T is going to bring up the Move dialog, the Transform dialog. So basically here I can still move things around, and up here I have a nice dialog. Now we talked in the first episode about how all these tools on the left have a corresponding menu all over here on the top with all these options. Now we can choose like our width and our height. Let's go ahead and lock those together. So if I change them, I'm just going to click here and drag this down to 55%, and I can change that, and now it's going to be 55% of the width and the height of the original. I can also type in pixels here. If I want this to be like 300 and then type in px, it's going to be 300 pixels tall. I can type in my width as well. I could say like 500 px wide. Now they're linked here, so they're basically going to keep the same aspect ratio. If I want to unlink those, I can I can do that, and I can say, you know what, my width I want to be 3,000 pixels wide, but my height is still going to be 476. Not many times you would actually need to do that, but you can do it right over here. All right, let's hit Escape. There we go. I'm going to hit Command T. Let's scale this down a little bit more so we can see this again, and we're going to show you a couple of the other things you can do with the Move tool here. So we've got our rotation that can be done right over here. You can type in the amount of degrees, so I can hit 45 and it'll rotate my image by 45 degrees, and we can do horizontal and vertical shear, which I really never ever do this, so I'm just going to hit 0 back on those. And we can also just click outside of the box. Here we go, and you'll get a little rotation key. It's a double arrow, and you can just click and drag there, so you can rotate around there. And you can see as you're rotating here, your degree will change right up there. All right, so this is the Move tool. It's incredibly powerful. Let's go ahead and rotate it right about there, and we're good to go. Now, the next thing you're going to want to get a good hold of is selections. And selections define a lot in Photoshop. Basically, if you want to affect just a certain area of your image, selections are the perfect tool to do that. Let's say I want to grab an area of my photo. So I'm going to grab a marquee selection tool. Let's just grab this area where her eyeglasses are. And then I'm going to hit Command T and grab my Move tool. So you can use these in combination. Now, Command T is going to transform that area, and now I can choose to just rotate around that area. So I'm no longer just rotating, what was actually in my layer. I'm not rotating just the entire layer. I'm actually changing just what was in that part of the selection. So we can hit Enter, and our selection remains. Now, if I decide to grab my brush tool, which is right down here, and I grab a color on my brush tool and start painting around, again, this is only going to show up within that selection. So selections are really, really powerful. Just remember, when you're done with your selection, deselect by hitting Command or Control D. There we go. Now if I paint, you can see it's going to show up everywhere in my image. All right, let's delete that layer because I just made a total mess out of it. But there we go. We've got our Move tool and our selections. Now, selections can be done in a couple other ways. We can use our lasso tool to make a selection that looks like that, things like this. You can hold the Shift key to add to selection, so I can select a couple of different areas. Now, if I decide to create a new layer and use my brush tool, there we go. Only those areas are going to be filled in. I can hold my Alt or the Option key as long as I'm on a selection tool. All right, if I'm on my Move tool and I hold Alt or Option, it's going to give me a different option. If I go to my selection tool, any of my selection tools, and hold Alt or Option, it'll minus out that selection. So kind of keep that in mind too, right? Each one of these tools has its own set of options and its own set of keyboard shortcuts. So you want to make sure you're selected on the right tool and then you've got the right keyboard shortcut set up. So holding down Alt or Option is going to minus out your selection, so you can make something like this. Shift is going to add to your selections. All right, there we go. And all these other tools are just selection tools. Magic Wand tool, things like that. They just basically select different areas of the photo. So we've already seen what our brush tool can do. B for the brush tool, and we're just going to choose a dark color here and basically just paint around the image. That's what the brush tool does, and it's in a selection right now. Let's hit Command D to deselect. Now, the brush tool is incredibly powerful, and I think I didn't really grasp how powerful the brush tool was for a long, long time. But the reason it's powerful is because you can paint right directly on your image, just like you would paint on a canvas, but you can also use the brush tool to define a layer mask, and that's going to be where a layer is visible or not visible. So let's just talk about that really quick. Our brush tool here. What we're going to do is I'm going to choose a large brush, and to do so, I'm going to hold down the Control and the Option key. It's going to be Alt and Control and then right click if you're on a PC, and on a Mac it's going to be Control and Option and click and drag from left to the right. And going from left to the right is going to make your brush smaller or larger, and up and down is going to make your brush harder and softer. So it's a really quick way to change hardness and size at the same time. Okay, now let's just say that we grabbed our background color and I'm going to just paint over top of her hair. This is like not the best way to do this, but let's just say that this is what we wanted to do. Okay, that looks great. Now, we talked a little bit about layer masks. If I want some of this layer to go away, I could just grab an eraser tool and I could make it go away. But what about something like I wanted some of it back again? I would just have to grab my brush tool and paint it back. There's a much more elegant way to do that, and that's by using what's called a layer mask. So whenever you're doing something in Photoshop, be sure you're creating new layers. That's what they're there for. Use them because they're going to really help you out and make things a lot more simple for you. So we painted blue on our background there. Now I'm going to put a layer mask on this layer. It's really easy to do. Just click right here on this button. It looks like a rectangle with a circle in it. And you'll get a layer mask right here. Now, layer masks are super simple. When they're white, everything is visible. When they're black, nothing is visible. And you can use your brush tool or any other tool. Your gradient tool, you can make selections, you can use a clone stamp tool. Your layer mask, you can paint and everything's going to show up. It's going to be black and white in a layer mask. Black makes things invisible, white makes things visible. So if I'm going to grab my brush tool and I'm going to paint black on my layer mask, you're going to see basically it's going to allow me to see through this layer wherever I'm painting black. So we can say like, okay, you know what? I thought that was good for the most part, but I only want it to be visible right over here. There we go. So I'm going to paint white on my layer mask where I want the layer to be visible, and then black where I don't want to be visible. All right, now I'm not doing much actual good to this photo right now, but you should get an idea of how the layer masks actually work. So paint white on a layer mask, it's going to make that visible. Paint black, and it's going to make it invisible. And you can go back and forth forever and ever and ever. There's no limit to this. This is not like an undo or anything like that. This is just a layer mask controls layer visibility. All right, so that's using the brush tool and the layer mask. Let's just delete this layer by hitting the delete key. I'm going to make a new layer, Shift Option Command N for a new layer, and we're going to go over a couple more of the tools that I use a lot in Photoshop. The next tool you guys are going to want to get to know is called the healing brush tool, and it's right beside the brush tool. These kind of go in order of like you're going to use these ones up here at the top a lot and these ones at the bottom not so much. So here's the healing brush tool. basically what this does is it samples the texture from wherever you sample and the color from wherever you paint, and it combines those together. Now, that sounds a little complex, but what it's used for is removing things like little, like dimples or spots or acne, things like that. For cleanup of the image, the healing brush tool is really great. Now, because we are using new layers, every time I'm in Photoshop, I'm always create a bunch of layers. I want to make sure that here in our healing brush options, remember our options are up here at the top, I want to make sure this samples, if it's current layer and my current layer is blank, you'll know it's blank because it looks like a a white and gray checkerboard. That's what transparent is. Then if I sample my current layer, nothing's going to happen because nothing's on this layer. So I'm going to make sure I change that to the current layer and the below. It'll sample layer 1 as well as my background. So let's just say, and her skin is dang near flawless. So let's just zoom in and we'll say, you know what? We do have a couple little spots right here. Now, normally I wouldn't retouch these because her skin is great and it doesn't need it, but I'm just going to show you what the healing brush tool does. So the healing brush tool, basically you hold Alt or Option to sample a color. There we go. And then you start painting over the area you actually want to change. And it's going to automatically blend everything back together for you. Let's just zoom out and see if I can find something a little bit larger. All right, so there's a little bit of a light spot right here. Can you guys see that? I'm going to hold Alt or Option and sample this point right there, and then I'm going to paint right over top there, and when I let go, it's going to take care of that spot for me because it samples the texture from where I'm actually holding Alt or Option and sampling. All right, is there anywhere else that I could, let's just zoom in and look at her finger there. Okay, hold Alt or Option here, sample this, and then I'm going to paint right over there, and it's going to clean up those little spots as well. So again, this is a very nicely, probably already retouched image, but that's basically how the healing brush tool works. It just sample one area and then paint it over top of another one, and it's perfect for getting rid of blemishes. Now the clone stamp tool is also really similar. You can see I've got a little preview of what it's actually going to do here. So the clone stamp tool is similar in the way that I can sample an area. So if I hold Alt or Option and sample this area, now I have a little preview, which you can turn off and on, by the way. To turn your preview off and on, go to Window and then down to Clone Source, and you can hit Show Overlay, and this will show you a little overlay of what you're about to paint, or you can uncheck that and it'll go away. Okay, so this basically, hold Alt or Option to sample a place and then start painting again. The clone stamp tool will not try to blend. The clone stamp tool will do no blending. All the clone stamp is going to do is a direct copy of wherever you paint. So I'm just painting another finger on here. There we go. Now I'm on a new layer, right? So if I decide to, I can use my move tool and I can move that finger wherever I want to. So all these things play together. I'm going to hit undo because I don't like that extra finger there, but they all play together. So you can use your brush tool on a layer and then a clone stamp tool on a layer, and then you can change the opacity of the whole layer. You can use your move tool to move the layer. So these are some of the more useful tools. Now I generally don't use the eraser tool that much. The reason being is because I use layer masks instead. I think they work quite a bit better. Okay, now back to one more thing I want to show you guys. I'm going to create a new layer. We're going to go back to the brush tool, and I'm going to answer a question that we get a lot here on Phlearn. What's the difference between opacity and flow? Well, basically here's how opacity works. If I have an opacity of 100% and a flow of 100%, let's just sample this color in the glasses here, and I paint on my image. That's what I get, okay? It's just, yep, it's just ink. Now, if I bring my opacity down, let's just say I'm going to hit the number 5 on my keyboard. That's going to change my brush opacity to 50%. Now, you can see that I'm painting at 50% opacity. You can see through it. If I hit the number 2, it's going to be 20%. You can see through that. So as I paint around, it's never going to cover up its own stroke. You have to let go of your brush or your Wacom tablet and then start painting again, and it'll do a little bit of an overlap, okay? So you have to let go each time you want that to build up, and that effect will build up. But if I don't let go, it's just going to paint 20% over and over and over again. All right, let's go ahead and get rid of that layer. Now, if I bring my opacity back to up to 100, but bring my flow down to about 20% by hitting Shift 2, then what's going to happen is as I paint, you're going to see not a whole lot is going to come down. At first, it's going to look a lot like opacity. But if I don't lift my brush up, if I keep going over an area over and over and over again, it's going to build up. It's going to be like a lot more natural of an effect. And this is what I prefer. When I'm working in Photoshop, I prefer to have my opacity at 100 and my flow relatively low, 10 to 20%. So I can cover an area. There we go. Let's just say I wanted to cover this in. I can cover this area and I can just keep going back and forth on it until it actually works for me. So I can sample this color here by holding Alt or Option with my brush tool. Sample that color there. There we go. Choose a nice large brush and blend these in. So you can see without even, creating selections, without really doing anything, fancy, it's like, wow, I thought you would need a fancy tool there or something to, fill in these glasses. You don't. I'm just basically blending colors, and you can see how it's darker on one side of the glasses over here than over here. So I'm going to use a soft brush and sample that color and just paint to kind of build that effect up, and then come from this other side and build that effect up to kind of match it. So we have a nice even fade from one color to another. It's because I'm using that build up. If I was using the opacity instead, it'd have been much harder to do something like that. All right, let's just delete that layer because we actually don't want that. Okay, so now that we've gone over the move tool, the selection tools, the brush tool, clone stamp tool, and the healing brush tool, that's really the majority of the tools that I use in Photoshop. And you might think that's hard to believe because you do some pretty crazy stuff in Photoshop, but it's true. The reason that I get to use basically just those simple tools for the most part is because of things called adjustment layers and layer masks. Now I'm going to show you guys a great adjustment layer. We're going to go down to our adjustment layers right over here, and I'm going to go to Hue, Saturation. Okay, so Hue, Saturation, what we're going to do is I'm going to bring our hue, let's just click and drag way over here. There we go. We're just going to bring this to blue. Now this is going to change the color of our glasses to blue, but it's going to change everything else. So if I just want to change the color of our glasses, I'm going to just click over here. We're going to go to our reds. I'm going to go to my eyedropper here, and I'm going to choose this color. So that's the color I want to change. And now I can actually adjust the hue. And you're going to see it's pretty much going to leave everything else alone. There we go. Let's just bring the hue a little bit more to the right. That looks pretty good. So now let's talk about using a layer mask. So I'm going to hit Command I on this layer, which is going to make this entire layer, the Hue Saturation Adjustment layer, it's going to make the layer invisible. So Command I. Now we can go in and use our brush tool. So if I want to make this, these glasses orange or whatever, I have a black layer mask. I just make sure to paint white on my layer mask where I actually want this to show up. So any kind of color change, things like that, again, even when you're compositing, a lot of the time you're going to be using the brush tool, and that's why using the brush tool is so important. My recommendation would be use about the size of the brush that's necessary for the job. These smaller areas here, use a smaller brush. Okay? Hold, again, the Control and the Option key, click and drag to the left or the right to change your brush size. All right, a little bit larger area means I can use a slightly larger brush. We're going to go over here and I'm going to paint this in there as well. So getting good with your brush tool means it opens up using all the other tools in Photoshop, especially when it comes to adjustment layers and things like that, because all you're going to be doing is making your adjustments and then affecting the layer masks. All right, let's show you a cool thing. So this is what our layer looks like so far. Let's turn this off and on. I can hold Alt or Option and click on my layer mask, and we can see that's what the layer mask actually looks like. Not that great, but we can see it does the job. Now I'm going to zoom in here and we're going to combine what we just did with the brush tool with a lasso tool. So let's go to our polygonal lasso tool. That's going to create some straight lines. And I'm going to bring the feathering up to about 1.5. So what I'm going to do, let's just click here. There we go. I'm going to click up top there. We're going to click down here. All right, there we go. I'm going to make like a lightning. There we go. Really cool. And I'm only going to bring it out to about there because everything else is going to be done with the brush tool. There we go. So I've created that selection, which is now, remember, I can only paint inside of selections. So that applies on layer masks, it applies on regular layers, everything. So I've got that area selected. I'm going to, again, grab my brush tool, and I'm going to paint white with my brush tool in this area. And it's not going to let me paint anywhere else. So what I've done is I've defined the left side of that little lightning bolt, and then I'm just going to go in here with the brush tool, and I'm going to fill this in to kind of meet it. There we go. So instead of trying to make this with the brush tool, I just made a quick selection that allowed me to make that, and now we have our hue saturation adjustment layer is changing us and giving us a little design in the glasses as well. So it's a really cool way to change your image quite a bit, and you don't need to know a lot of tools. You just need to know how to use a couple selection tools and a brush tool. Now, if I want to, let's just double click right over here. I'm going to go back to my, let's see, my magentas, because that's what I edited earlier, right? I can actually click this and I can change it even after I've already made my selection. So the layer mask stays the same. I'm just changing what's happening with the layer itself. So if I wanted to go more like a blue or a green, I could do that as well. I could make it lighter or darker and change my saturation. So a lot of control happens right there within an adjustment layer and using a layer mask. So hue saturation is a big one. The next two adjustment layers I'm going to show you guys are going to be curves and levels. They basically do the same thing, but they control almost everything that has to do with color in Photoshop. So let's go grab a curves adjustment layer. So adjustment layers, and I'm going to go to curves. Okay, basically here's how a curves adjustment layer works. If you have RGB selected, which is default, it's going to change the red, green, and blue values at the same time. And because this photo is in the RGB color space, that's basically all the color space that you get. So RGB at the same time, if you click here and drag that up, it's just going to make your image lighter. Down is going to make your image darker. So you can see, lighter, you can just bring this up and then use a layer mask, which we just learned how to do. Darker, same thing. Now, here in our red channel, you can actually change this and just adjust the red channel. If I click and drag this up in the middle, it's going to add more red. Down is going to add more cyan, because cyan in curves, now there's a lot of different theories of color and things like that, additive, subtractive. In Photoshop, in your curves, cyan is the opposite of red. Okay, that's all you need to know for this dialog. So up is going to add more red, down is going to add more cyan. Green, up is going to add more green, down is going to add more magenta. Okay, and then here in our blue, up is going to add more yellow, and down is going to add more blue. Sorry, I'm in my green. I was like, why does that look weird? Blue, up is going to add more blue, and down is going to add more yellow. All right, so let's just say we did want to do this. I'm going to just click and we're going to have this add a little bit more blue. Let's zoom out here, and we can see this makes our image a little more blue now, right? Well, I don't want this to be visible everywhere. So let's hit Command I on my curves adjustment layer. I'm going to grab my brush tool, and we're going to choose a very large brush. And now I'm just going to paint white on this side of the image. So I can choose a brush that's as big as my entire image if I want. It really doesn't matter. Your brush can go really, really large. So using that, we can see I made that area a bit more blue. Now let's say I want to warm up the other side. I'm going to create another curves adjustment layer. Okay, I'm going to go into my red channel and pump up, give it a little bit more red and a little bit less blue, and that's going to be orange. So red and yellow combined is orange. Just remember, yellow is the opposite of blue in this dialog. So we're going to hit Command I on that. Okay, I'll choose a very large brush. There we go, and I add more warmth on this side just by painting that in. Now if it's too much, I can just lower the opacity. That's not a big deal at all. So again, we haven't used any new tools. I'm just using the brush tool and a couple selections, and we're able to do things like change the color of our glasses and even make the image warmer and cooler based on just those same tools that we learned. Now, curves is a really great tool because it allows you to change the information that's in your image. Levels does the exact same thing. Let's just go to levels. It's just a different way of displaying what you're doing. So instead of, here in the curves where you click and drag this middle guy up and down, that's here in the levels basically just doing this, okay? They both do it's basically just a different way of showing it. Curves can be a little more complex because you can actually create a couple different points here and really start to do this stuff, but in my opinion, you keep it a little bit more simple than this. All right, so if you grab the left point in curves and you bring this up, it's going to be the same thing as if you were to grab this guy on the levels and you bring that up. If you bring this down in your levels, it's the same thing as bringing this point down in your curves. You can see they do the same thing to the image. So if you're a person who's like, you know what, I don't want to learn curves and levels, I just want to learn curves, totally fine. You can learn one and stick with that, you'll be fine. You never have to touch a levels adjustment layer if you don't want to. Curves will get you there. Now let's say you want to keep things organized in Photoshop. The best way to do that with your layers is to group them together. It's a really simple technique. All you have to do is shift click on all the layers you want together, and you can hit Command or Control G. It's going to group those together. So you can turn that entire group of layers off and on to see the changes that you made. Now, not only that, but you can put a layer mask on a group, and it's going to control the visibility of every single layer that's inside of it. So you can see I'm painting black on my layer mask, and it's going to change the blue that I added over there, the orange that I added there, and it's going to change what's going on in these glasses. Okay? Now, it's not going to actually do anything to the layers themselves. You can open this up and see they all have their own layer masks, but it's going to add an additional layer of visibility as well. So another thing to keep in mind, if you need a layer mask and you're like, I need another layer mask, just group that layer and use that layer mask. It's a great way to go ahead and change those things. Okay, now one more thing we're going to show you. I'm going to create a new layer, and we're going to go, let's just choose a color here, a nice yellow. All right, and this time I'm going to just paint right here in the middle of our glasses. All right, and you can see I chose a brush that's a little bit smaller. There we are. A little bit smaller of a brush because I'm going to just affect this area. Now, if I wanted to go through and use a selection tool, I could use a selection tool that would allow me to actually paint this a little bit better. Something like a lasso tool, or if I really wanted to make a great selection here, I would use a pen tool. And we have a lot of great episodes on the pen tool as well here on Phlearn.com. All right, but for now we're just going to use the brush tool because this is a quick start guide. Okay, so let's just say we painted this area yellow on our glasses. That doesn't look great, but you could actually get a lot of use out of this, even if you don't clean it up much. I'm going to show you how blending modes work. So here we've got this yellow. These are our blending modes. Now we have things like our darken group, our lighten group. All these things will lighten. Overlay group changes, like basically blends these areas in. Difference, and then some color options down here. I would really recommend spending some time here. Just keep in mind that if you're up here, these guys that are grouped together, these first 5, they're all going to darken. So darken is basically going to blend the yellow in and make things darker. Multiply is really similar, and you can see it a little bit better. Let's just grab a darker color and see what multiply really does. Change this from normal down to multiply. It really does a strong blend. So multiply is probably the strongest of the darken group. And that's kind of how it works. Usually it's like this is like the darken, and the multiply is like the super darken. All right, we're going to go over here to lighten and see what that does. All right, it doesn't really look that good. Let's try screen, and there we go. Screen is basically, the other interesting thing about screen is anything that's black on an image won't show up when it's on a screen adjustment layer. Same thing if it's white, it won't show up on a multiply adjustment layer. So there are all these nuances with each of the blending modes that you just kind of have to get in there and play around to see what they do. Let's go down here to overlay. That's just going to blend those colors really nicely, and then soft light's going to be a slightly softer version of overlay. And you can change your opacity with any of these layers. All right, if you guys want a quick tip of quick guide of the actual ones that I use most of the time, we're usually using darken and multiply, as well as lighten and screen and overlay and soft light. That's I would say 90% of the time, those are the color blend modes that we're going to be using. Now you can still put a layer mask on this layer. If I put a layer mask here, I can zoom in, and instead of cleaning this up, from the original selection, I can just paint black on my layer mask in these areas. And what it's going to do, let's just turn this off and on so you can see, it's just going to make this layer not visible. So if I want to paint black over here, so I'm always able to clean up anything that I've actually made in this image. All right, let's clean that up right over there as well. And we're just painting black, which makes this area not visible because we're on our layer mask. And let's say I want these lines on the end to be a little cleaner. I'm going to grab my lasso tool here. We're going to use the polygonal lasso tool for drawing straight lines. I'm going to click here. We're going to go in like that, down there. So I'm just making a selection that looks like this. It's just encompassing the areas that I want to actually change. And we're going to change, I'm going to paint black with the layer mask right there. And that's just going to make sure that we have a nice clean lines, and I can change the shape of that as well. And that's done using a layer mask on a soft light layer. So that's it for the tools that I most commonly use in Photoshop. And if you guys get a good handle of these, things like the move tool, your selection tools, the brush tool, healing brush, and the clone stamp, you're gonna be able to do most of what you need to do in Photoshop. These go really well with your layers and the layer blend modes, as well as adjustment layers, like those curves adjustment layers we played around with, as well as layer masks. So get a good handle of all those things, and you're gonna be well on your way to being great in Photoshop. If you guys want a lot more information on this same topic to really get you up to speed with Photoshop, be sure to check out our Photoshop 101 and 201 Pro tutorials. They're amazing tutorials. They're hours and hours of pure Photoshop knowledge. Thanks so much for watching Florin, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave us a comment down below if there's anything else you guys would like to learn from Florin. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and share this with your friends. Thanks again, guys, and we'll Florin you later. Bye, everyone.